Are you a man looking for an intensive program to help you overcome your sexually addictive behaviors? Gateway to Freedom is your answer. Gateway to Freedom is a 3-day intensive workshop for men seeking to overcome sexually addictive behaviors. Whether married, single, or divorced, Gateway to Freedom will help men regain hope for a new life of purity and real contentment. The workshop is conducted by experts in the field of sexual addiction recovery. Your experts have over 35 years of combined experience. Read testimonials of workshop alumni at gatewaymen.com. Get all the info and register online at gatewaymen.com or call 1-800-49-PURITY.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I'm the founder of the Gateway to Freedom workshop. I want to personally invite you to be part of our next workshop coming up January 16th through the 18th in Texas. So call us today at 1-800-49-PURITY or visit gatewaymen.com.
Welcome to Pure Sex Radio, training men, educating women. Are you ready to get real and start living each day in purity? This dynamic program is designed to educate, encourage, and equip listeners with the tools necessary for living a life of sexual purity. Pure Sex Radio brings you the best in mobile talk radio. Listen to real-life struggles, learn how to overcome lust, pornography, and sex addiction, and get serious about purity. Your hosts for Pure Sex Radio are Jonathan Doherty and Stephen Cervantes. Jonathan is the director of Be Broken Ministries and founder of the Gateway to Freedom Workshop for Men. Stephen is the founder of the Hope Counseling Center. Visit us online at puresexradio.com. And now, please welcome Jonathan and Stephen on Pure Sex Radio.
Good day, radio listeners. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. We're glad to have you here with us. My name is Jonathan, and I'm here with Stephen. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I am blessed by our Father in heaven, and great to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the new year, listeners. It's exciting to be into another broadcast year, and just seeing what God has been doing over the last. We're into our 12th year. And so it's exciting to just see what God has been doing through this ministry locally around the country. And even we've had people that have been contacting us all around the world where we have listeners, believe it or not, in over 80 countries. And so it's just exciting to see what God is doing. And we're looking forward to another year of opportunities to serve others and help folks that are struggling with sexual brokenness issues to find healing and hope in the giver of all hope, the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, Stephen, I think it's only appropriate that as we start a new year, we sort of roll out this incredible kind of new vision for sexuality for men. Why don't you tell the listeners kind of how this struck you? It was sort of like a bolt of lightning, kind of, in a way.
That's right. It's sort of funny. I sometimes wake up during the middle of the night and all these thoughts flood in. Or first thing in the morning, and I have to write as fast as I can because they're gone after that. And it's like God speaking to me. And it's pretty exciting because then I get to kind of mull it over all day and think about it and flesh the whole thing out. So let me back up a minute and say you and I were in Colorado Springs, and we were talking to a group of college single males. And I was pretty fearful about what are we going to say? This is a young population. We don't usually work with young guys, this young, in concentration, in large group is what I'm saying here. So I got to thinking about it, and I got to thinking about just the struggle of male sexuality. And I've never really known what to tell a young man who's full of testosterone and alive sexually but also who is really trying to be godly and do right. You know, the culture is full of lies and distortions, and you pick up stuff on the side, and guys joke. But what is a father really supposed to tell his son about sexuality?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
You want me to actually?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But it was just a big question out there because you have a son. I had 2 daughters, but you have a son, and so I got to dodge the bullet actually of what to say. But I was reminded with these young men that I'm very weak in this area of what would you say to a boy who said, Dad, tell me about male sexuality. Tell me about urges, Dad. Tell me about pornography. Tell me, Dad. So what are you thinking right now as I'm saying this?
I'm wanting you to give me the answer because, this is a challenging area. I mean, I think it's something that we are just, first of all, I would say that it's okay to feel completely unprepared and inadequate in this area as a father. I think sometimes you just got to own that emotion. Because sometimes we feel like we have to have the right answers. We have to give all the solutions to our kids. And I think one of the things that we're going to try to flesh out in these next couple of broadcasts is the idea that, we can only really offer to our kids, at least in a genuine way, what we are pursuing ourselves. So like I think of it in terms of like, okay, what do I want to tell my son? Well, you know what? I better not only instruct him in truth and in grace, but I better be leading him in that, not simply just telling him that.
That's good.
And so what I'm feeling right now is, that great sense of responsibility that I not only need to instruct my son, but I need to model for my son what healthy male sexuality looks like. What am I pursuing as a man in terms of my sexuality, so that when I do speak to my son, I've got credibility.
Yeah, and I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking maybe that's why it's so stressful, because most men don't have good control, right? They're sloppy in their head, and they're sort of secretive, and they keep a little stuff there that nobody knows about. And even if they don't act out sexually, you still have a mind to control in this very sick culture that's getting sicker with sexual temptation. And
don't you think, too, that some guys, because they feel maybe kind of sloppy in the management of their sexuality, they then make the assumption that they can't or shouldn't say anything to their sons about sexuality.
Wow.
It's like if I'm not perfect in that area, then I don't have a voice at all. And I want to kind of set some dads free out there and say, listen, we're all on a journey of it's a messy journey. No matter how well you're managing your sexuality, nobody manages it perfectly.
Yes.
So we had better be speaking into our sons' lives because they're getting a lot of messages from elsewhere in the culture.
And if I can't have perfect control, then maybe I better not say something. But then that leaves your kid in darkness.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And that doesn't help.
That creates even more confusion for him.
And it's interesting how you started. I'm sort of overwhelmed. It's scary. It's a big project. So we're going to go kind of slow on this show today, pulling out everything we can to help a man sort of come to grips with it and yet have a tool to use at the same time. Because this is a wonderful introduction about just the fear that a father has when it comes to, okay, you better coach your son well. You better coach him right. And he's going to be a reflection of you. That's a lot of pressure.
That is a ton of pressure.
And I think to myself, in my story, I didn't hear much. It was like, figure it out on your own. I'm sending you to private school. They have the answers there at the private school. So they'll teach you everything you need to know about life, son. Well, it was an all-boys private school, and I learned a lot from boys.
Right, yeah. And that's why I think the other thing about this I think boys, they need that sense of authority covering them. Because sometimes what ends up happening, think about how confusing it is. First of all, think about how confusing it is just to be, let's say, a teenager, a young teenager, 12, 14, 15 years old, something like that. And the idea is now you're going to ask that child who only has a child's experience and a child's perspective to figure out something that's very mature like sexuality.
That's true.
And so they need the protection of that authority figure that's going to say, listen, I'm going to cover you. I don't want you to feel afraid of this thing. I don't want you to feel afraid of this world and all the temptation that's out there. I want to give you some protection.
If you could see Jonathan right now, he has his hands up like he's covering over his family, his son. He's got his hands up to bless them. And that's exactly the right picture, is that a young man needs an older man willing to say, hey, I messed up, or I didn't do it perfect, or I stumble, or guess what happened to me? And so then the other question I have, because we're now going to trigger every man's story, but I told you my story. I didn't get much. What would you say? Did you get much?
Oh, no. I mean, I got little tiny bits of information along the way, but I never really felt like I knew my dad's personal journey and his personal, how he handled his sexual. I never felt like I got that from him in terms of, how do you manage this? How do you manage these incredible hormones and feelings and temptations? And I never felt like I got that. I got instruction on the mechanics, but I didn't get necessarily, I wasn't actually shown or invited into a conversation and maybe a journey of how to go from childhood to adulthood in terms of this avenue of sexual growth.
We've sort of stumbled into another area that needs a few more minutes. I know we said we're going to give a vision, and it may take us 2 shows to get to the vision because this setup is too good. Because I was just thinking, there's a real fear. You don't want to wake up sexuality in your child, right? You want them to be a child, but at some point they wake up, right? And we don't know when it is. And I heard a father say recently, I told my son, one day you're going to see some porn, naked women in a magazine. And when you do, I want you to come and talk to me. I thought, oh my goodness. If your father or my father had said that to me, would that not have changed things?
Maybe. And the only reason I'm saying that is because I'm kind of picturing that dad out there that's going, okay, good. This is all I need to tell my son. I need to go out and now I think it would have helped, at least in the sense of saying, okay, I've got another avenue to take.
Yes.
But I have to admit, for me personally, as a kid, I think there were other elements that weren't necessarily established in my relationship with my dad to feel that at ease to say, yeah, I saw this and boy, I feel like I want to go initiate a conversation with my dad.
I appreciate you saying that because lots of dads told us, shut up, just work, son. Just paint the fence, cut the grass.
Right.
I don't want to hear what you have to say. Just do the best you can.
But here's what I would say about that. Would it have helped? Yes.
Yeah.
Would I necessarily have used that avenue? I don't know.
Right. Would it have changed the course of your life? I don't know. But having a place and an adult. And do you hear the heart of this father? I want to tell my son because nobody told me. And I thought, how interesting. It can't hurt.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's just it. That's what I was going to say is that whether or not your son takes that avenue and says, hey, Dad, I looked at porn today. I saw it for the first time.
Yeah.
Whether or not he does that, you're keeping the door open and at least letting him know you're available, you're there. One of the things I've told dads that have said that before is saying, you always want to keep that door open, but never assume that your child is going to initiate walking through it. So in other words...
You mean grab it and say, this is great, I'm going to explore this for all it's worth? Is that what you're saying? A son might not do that?
What I mean is I think we assume that if we just tell our child we're available for them to come to us, that they will come to us.
I see.
But the fact of the matter is most kids, think about when you first saw porn. Did it not just rattle your whole world? It's confusing. It's very overwhelming.
But it's secret. It's powerful. I tapped a power. I don't even know if my dad knows this power and so the tendency I wrote down, I was doodling here, but when we're young men, we keep secrets to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We don't go to the elders and say, I have a secret.
And that's just it. So I often think, too, you need to also not only have the door open, but you need to be willing to step through it toward them and maybe more proactively invite them into that door with things like, probing questions, not simply, hey, I'm available if should you see this, but more like, hey, son, just wanted to check in with you. Have you seen any porn lately? Has anybody shown you anything? Has anybody done anything that you're uncomfortable with? So asking questions that are like saying, I'm going to step across the threshold here and invite you into this place.
But that's even being more aggressive, right?
It is.
Which probably is required when there's a world of secrets.
And I'm probably getting ahead of myself because there's probably many, many dads out there. Because to do that, you have to be in a place of where you've embraced your brokenness. You are working on your sexuality.
Yes.
You are in a place of health.
Yes.
And so I'm getting too far ahead because some dads out there might just be breathing into a paper sack, having a panic attack.
Maybe on the floor, curled up right now.
I can't
what are
imagine.
you asking me to do
Right.
to go to my teenage son and say,
Ask if he's looked at porn.
have you
or-
seen
yeah.
porn and been exposed to stimulation and arousal? And let's talk about the fantasies you're growing in your mind, son, and are they going to set you free or are they going to be traps for a lifetime? No, that's a great, great discussion. And I think preparation is required. And you know what you said a minute ago, and see, we're constructing the framework to release this vision, right? If we just throw a vision on a guy and we don't tell him, it's scary. It's going to open a discussion, and there should be many discussions, not one discussion one time, but there should be multiple opportunities of checking in.
Exactly.
And then the other thing you said that was interesting, if you already have a rhythm where you go to your son or your son comes to you about anything, then that can continue in this area too.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you don't have that rhythm, it sure is hard to start now. Mama might say, okay, you're the dad. Here's a piece of paper. Go talk to your boy. It was like, you haven't been talking to your boy all along.
And that's just it. And here's what I found, not only from myself as a child, but also even as a parent, is that I've found that if you don't have an ongoing conversation, then what it can look like, especially I think from a father to a son, is it can look like if I can put it this way, it can look like you're being scolded.
Yes, that's right.
You're in trouble.
Talking down to.
Even if you're trying to instruct. And that's what I felt like sometimes even with my dad. I know his heart was to instruct. But because we so rarely had any of these conversations, to bring up such a heavy and difficult topic, it felt like Big Dad is kind of, yelling down at little son. And even though his intention was, I'm warning you, I don't want you to, it felt like I'm in trouble,
That's good.
And so I think that's why if you
good.
have an ongoing dialogue with your son, then when you have to go to a little bit deeper level on this topic, it doesn't feel like, oh man, I'm in trouble and dad's just, getting all red in the face because of this big scary thing called sexuality,
And I better just say yes.
Right.
Whatever you're saying, I better say yes, sir, yes,
Right.
sir, yes, sir. Because as you're speaking, I'm thinking the topic of sexuality is a big topic. It's a lifelong topic. It's a heavy topic. It's a fearful topic at times. It's unexplored verbally, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not discussed well. You think about the grown-up men that you know that are at peace with talking about their sexuality. Now we're going to tell a boy who's trying to figure out his body and changing and life and girls and knobby knees and hair showing up, and now we're going to tell him about this big, heavy thing. I think you're right. I think grace is required
absolutely.
in this truth discussion. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
So so here's what you're about to hear, folks. We've been trying to discuss how do we tell our sons, how do we explain to sons male sexuality in sort of a God understood context. So it's not just a physical biology lecture. It's how do we integrate our sexuality and our God and our life all into one. And so we have 12 vision statements. And we're going to spend the rest of this show and part of the next show or whatever it takes to go through 12 vision statements. I'm going to make the statements, and I want you to comment, and I want us to talk about the statements, okay? Are you ready? Number 1, struggling with sexuality is a part of manhood.
Now, the hard thing about that is that here we are, first vision statement, And I can already sense in our audience that there are going to be men that go, I don't want to accept that.
But how come? Tell me what's...
I think it's because a lot of times, especially for Christian men, we look at the truth of God's word in terms of where he draws the boundary lines around managing our sexuality and the context in which he tells us to enjoy our sexuality, which is marriage. And then we look at that in the context of all of the things swirling around in our culture that are trying to pull us away, but we tend to have a perfectionistic mindset toward those boundaries that God has given us. And what I mean by that is we say, if I can't hold absolute perfection in my sexuality, then I'm just a complete failure. And then the shame washes in. And so the idea to say that struggling, having this tension in our sexuality and in our being, a lot of guys go, I don't want that. I say I'm a follower of Jesus. I want to do things the way he's told me. And, only if I'm doing that perfectly am I going to have peace in my soul. And it's like the guys it's hard to embrace the idea of tension.
I see. That's a good point.
Of the struggle.
Because we even heard some things about if you're just if you're just spiritual, if you could just almost do away with the body, you could be really pleasing to God. That's what it's about. Just if you didn't have a body that had a struggle in it, somehow that's the better way. Mm-hmm. But we have bodies and we struggle. And our culture and aging and sexuality is about youth and beauty and nakedness. And there's a struggle. So number one, and here's what I'd like to ask you to do. We need feedback. We're two guys in a room talking, but we're having a discussion with a bunch of people on a big basis. And so write these down and give us feedback. We need to hear if we're off or if it doesn't make sense or if we should tweak a word. It would really bless us if we could get some feedback on this vision statement. So number one, struggling with sexuality is a part of manhood. Number two, God knows you will struggle with your sexuality.
Now, this is something that I think hopefully will start to bring a little bit of a breath of fresh air to those guys that panicked at number one, is the idea that nothing that you can struggle with. And understand, too, struggle doesn't mean always failing. Struggle means there's just tension in our being. There's a tension between how God's designed our sexuality for purity and chastity and marriage, and then all the things that are pulling us to cross that line. And none of this takes God by surprise. And I find great comfort in that. In fact, I really find peace in my being to know that there's nothing I can struggle with in my sexuality, that somehow God is taken by surprise and says, I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know you were going to struggle like that. It's not.
No, that's interesting.
He's not shocked.
Because we sort of think God doesn't know this, or this is bigger than God, or somehow nobody's just done this but me. Right? Somehow we do little thinking.
And you know why I think sometimes we think that? Because we might have had a parent that came to us at one point when they found out about something that we were doing across the line, and what did they say to us? What were you thinking? How could you do that? They gave us the shock statements. They gave us the statements that said, clearly there's something wrong with you that you did fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. God never does that. He said, son, I knew you were going to do this. I knew you were going to struggle. I'm here for you. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to say, what were you thinking? I'm going to say, hey, come on, get back up. Let's keep going. Get more, you're going to get more familiar with this struggle. You're going to be able to learn how to manage it better, and then just keep moving forward.
That's good. I think these top three go together. Number one, struggling with sexuality is a part of manhood, and God knows you will struggle with your sexuality, and he's at rest. That doesn't trouble him or make him not sleep at night, Number three, God thinks this struggle is an essential part of a man's life.
Now, this is one where, Stephen, you may get some people that don't like you too much for saying this. But here's the thing I've discovered, and you know this too, and that's one of the reasons why I think you've put it in here as one of these vision statements, is that we often think this should be an optional part of a man's life.
It's an option. You can just get rid of
like,
your
God,
sexuality.
thank you. I'd like to opt out of that. I'd like to opt out of and how many times
good.
how many times have we heard guys who have developed a sexual addiction say, I don't know if God cares about me because I've asked him to take it away 1,000 times.
And
to take away the sexual struggle, to take away the sexual urges, there are guys that say it would be better for me to just be emasculated, for me to be castrated, for me to just have no sexuality than to struggle in the way that I do. And you know what I believe, though? The reason that God
That's a strong statement you just made. That's almost kind of funny. God swoop in here and pull this piece of me out of me.
And you know what? And there's a reason why God has never once said, okay, I'll remove your sexuality. And I think it's because of this vision statement right here. Because one of the best ways that we can grow and mature as men is in this struggle with our sexuality. If we will allow ourselves to be sharpened by God using this struggle to grow us in humility, to grow us in honesty, to grow us in depending upon his grace and his sufficiency. And how much, how well would we learn that if all of a sudden God just magically took away all of our sexual struggles? And you could certainly use other struggles in this idea that I'm talking about here, but since we're talking about sexuality, I believe that means for men, it is an essential part of our life as men. Not something that we go, I'd really like to just take it away and then I'll become this great, godly man. He says, you have no idea that I'm using this as the pathway to make you into a great godly man.
That is interesting. Now this makes this a 3A, and this is exactly why I like talking about this stuff and getting feedback, because 3A then says God is using the sexual struggle to make us into what he wants. Mm-hmm. That's what you just said, right? Yeah. He's using this very thing that we've distorted and twisted and bent, but he's using male sexuality as a challenge to us, right? Mm-hmm. As a way for us to be in submission. And more of this is going to make sense. But let me say, after we've talked about this God part, the thought that occurs to me is this: don't eat the fruit. Don't eat the fruit. When temptation calls, don't eat the fruit. When it looks shiny and sparkly and attractive, don't eat the fruit. Aren't we talking about the garden again? Mm-hmm. When we talk about male sexuality, it will not add to your life. Don't lie to yourself. It's going to make you like a god. It will not make you like a god. It will not make you any more. It'll make you worse, but it won't make you more godlike. And it won't set you free. It won't set you free. Mm-hmm. So we're sort of repeating, struggling with sexuality is a part of manhood. And God knows you will struggle with your sexuality. And God thinks this struggle is an essential part of man's life. And God is using this sexual struggle to make us into what he wants of us. So he won't swoop in and take it away. He's using this very tool, this very battle. What do you think?
And the thing is it's hard sometimes to see the grace of God in such a light. We often think of the grace of God as just saying, he gives me what I don't deserve. And so we have this idea that means he's going to remove all this tension in my being. He's going to remove all the struggle. He's going to remove all this temptation from my life. And I think if we look at our Savior Jesus, who it says about him, he was tempted in every way just as we are, then I think we understand that if God was not even willing to remove temptation from the Son of God, why would he remove temptation from us? It's part of the refining process. It's part of us. It's part of us walking as our Savior walked. And so I think if you want to grow, start by embracing these first really critical 3 vision statements here. And seeing that this tension in your being, the struggle with temptation, this is not something that God sees as optional to your growth. He says this is something that's essential to your growth. And my grace is sufficient to carry you through those temptations.
And don't think you found something that God didn't know about, that's a secret, and you can keep it behind a wall divided, and somehow it's your little toy for your pleasure. God's saying it was never for your pleasure. It's for my glory.
Well, we hope this has laid a good foundation for what's coming ahead in the next couple of sessions, but we're glad you've been with us, and we look forward to having you back here again next week on the Pure Sex Radio broadcast.
Pure Sex Radio is paid for by Be Broken Ministries. Visit us online at puresexradio.com.